But so I get called away to do like something on one of my jobs, and these other guys stayed there. They dared each other to streak through the quad with all the girls, soccer girls around and stuff. And so they took their clothes off.
For the past 3 decades, I have had a not so secret obsession simmering beneath the layers of an average American life. The time has come to seek the community of like minded true believers. This is the road to Beard Eye Nation. Episode Biz: The Fall and Rise of Beard Eye at Lake Forest College. I have not kept up well with my alma mater since leaving the Chicago area 20 plus years ago. Lake Forest College is a 1,500 student liberal arts institution located on 107 wooded acres in an extremely wealthy suburb 30 miles north of the Windy City on the shores of Lake Michigan. I had a feeling the flame of Beard Eye that ignited during my time at the school had been extinguished as the school pivoted in terms of academic rigor and profile of their target applicants. Nevertheless, the journalistic standards of the 9 Stories Up investigative department require first-hand recollection, regardless of its reliability. For this, I turned to a younger brother who attended Lake Forest. Now, before you get confused, he is not a member of the Choir of True Believers. Unlike many of them, he is not my brother in some sort of secret societal or shared experienced metaphor sense. This person and I are brothers in the literal, we have the same father usage of the word. So, what, tell me, what years were you at Lake Forest?
Uh, 2007 to 2011.
Okay. And how much Beard Eye did you play when you were at Lake Forest?
0.
How much Beard Eye did you see when you were at Lake Forest?
Epsilon, which is mathematician for very, very close to 0. I think the first time I saw it, I was a senior, and it was friends who were kind of playing it as a gag. Like it was like they got bored with beer pong and they were trying to find something else to do. It was pretty much non-existent.
How did
Uh,
they know about it to play it as a gag?
so I mean, I don't know. I mean, it's part of the cultural memory, right? It's like how everyone knows what a atom bomb looked like, even though no one's ever seen it up close. So it's like there's some there's some mushroom cloud of beer pong or beer dye imprinted in our consciousness. But like it was, yeah, I mean, beer pong was really the dominant model. And I never really liked that either. I liked talking too much to play a game while I was drinking.
You love Beard Eye then, because Beard Eye is all about talking.
Yeah,
That's all you
maybe.
do.
I don't know. It was because I mean I remember hearing from you as a child about your whatever adventures in the sporting life, and I mean I guess I expected it to be around. And in high school we played beer pong in East Hampton. And I guess I kind of thought it was like a regional thing, like beer dye was the Midwestern version of beer pong, but it never materialized. I think it was like the invasive species that outgrew the whatever, the local population.
It's funny. Do you you know that our sister's best male friend from her childhood, he plays Beard Eye a lot
That's true,
out in
yeah.
your hometown. Yeah.
But I've never seen it in New York. I
Yeah.
mean, obviously I knew some people like the summer after I graduated college, I moved into Chicago and I was friends with people who played in the backyard, like, but not in school. And they weren't actually people from Lake Forest. They were like Chicago people. Uh, so yeah, I also was like probably on the more nerdy side of the campus, right? Like I'm sure
Right.
there have been people in whatever Gregory doing their doing their beer dye. But I was not part of that scene. But I mean, I was
Yeah.
for But they were just very much like, and there was kids who were obsessed with beer pong, like would practice it with water in the daytime so that they could be better at it at night, like weird shit. Like, I mean, they didn't go to class, but they practiced their beer pong. But I was never super interested in these games. I'm not I have little hand-eye coordination.
It's funny you should say that because I don't see anything wrong with that behavior. I just think they're choosing the wrong game. But that's neither here nor there. Do you remember when you were about like goodness, you had to be like 12 or 13. You had to be like 13 or 14. No, 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 you were probably like 12 because it was before I was married. And maybe you may have been like 11 and you came out to Chicago and my roommate and I were playing one-on-one in the kitchen and we were trying to figure out how we would simulate drinking for
Yeah,
someone your age so you could play with us. And the only thing we came up with was like you weren't allowed to go to the bathroom during the game. Like you had to play with water and you weren't allowed to go to the bathroom. That was the best kid way of doing it we could think of.
no, I do remember that. I mean, I think I feel like I've been exposed to beer diet through osmosis through you much more than in any other part of my life. You know what I mean? I've never really like in the wild, I haven't seen it, but like yeah, I grew up with thinking this was going to be a much bigger part of my adult life, I think, than it turned out to be.
While we knew Beard Eye was in the administration's crosshairs when it was added to the student handbook my senior year as the parenthetical example for a drinking game that might be prohibited, hearing that Beard Eye had been replaced by the vastly inferior beer pong probably triggers an et tu brute sensation among the choir of true believers listening to this. It wasn't long before my brother got to campus that Beard Eye was at the height of its influence and excess at the school. But similar to the Romans and all other notable empires before their respective falls from power, we at Lake Forest were oblivious that one was even possible.
One thing I wonder about, and I don't know what it was like before, um, just in terms of like the popularity and growth of the game on our campus, how much of that was due to the fact that like you couldn't actually play it on campus, but you tried to find a way to do it. When you got a house, it's like it's easy to play, it's always accessible, but trying to bring in a table, carry a keg, or however many cases you wanted to bring it to the front room of your quad or the back room of your quad and actually try and play it in there. Uh, I know there were some guys that did on the top of a dorm and sort of like that. I feel like that became part of the mystique of it, of what is sort of the most, extravagant location to try and get that into.
And those guys, and they would just turn their quad into the beer die. The front room was just where they'd have a board and they'd just be playing beer die. And then, I mean, that was what I walked my freshman year. That was like what I walked into. And I just was like, oh, this is what we do out there playing beer die. You know what I mean? It was just all those guys that were they were the leaders in football. So I got to know them first because, we came in early for camp. And I was like, oh my God, who are these people? And like looking up to them. And every guy that I thought was like had personality and was like a cool guy,
don't know where to
they
go
were all
with
playing
that.
beer die.
But
So I was like, oh, okay, I guess this is what we do.
The coolest thing was that, like, culturally across the school, it wasn't just like we're gonna get it's a bunch of dudes in a room playing die. Like, no, it was like this was a school thing. Like, you could play, and if you have fast hands and clean, you could catch and you could drink. Like, you're good. It doesn't matter. You could play. You're down to play. Like, and you could have fun. You could have fun doing it. And it would just be, all right, we're doing this is Tuesday night. Let's go to Jerry's, get a 30 rack or 2 or 3. I mean, I think, okay, this is the game we used to play. And like you go and like not I would bet that like less than 10% of the campus will play it. Will have played it. Whereas like that would have been the inverse, like while we were there, right? Like, you basically have like the what was it, the foreign house, whatever, the exchange student house. Like those guys may not have played it, but that's about it. Like you've got, even in Lois, you had tournaments. People have tournaments in Lois. Like I'm
people, trying to explain, well, okay, 4 guys sitting on a corner and a cup apiece, throwing a die through the field goal and all these nuanced rules. And the funny reconciliation of people uniformly saying, well, that sounds kind of dumb, but I guess we'll see, to then their incredible fascination with the game when they did have a chance to play it. And it's funny, as far as talking about, kind of not relegated but limited to kind of fraternity quarters, etc. By the time I got to Lake Forest freshman year, my friends were playing floor die, they called it, just in the back of their quad, where they where they would, because they couldn't get onto a table in one of the lounges somewhere, they would figure out other ways to play. That's how prolific it had become. And it wasn't just, it absolutely was not thought of as a Greek thing. Everyone was trying to play beer die.
From when I started Lake Forest, when I ended Lake Forest, it was something that it seemed like it was reserved in the fraternity quarters. And you had to search to find a game. Now that could be part of a function of me being a freshman, not know my way around, don't know everybody yet, things like that. And by senior year, you know where everything is, know everybody is, right? But what I saw were girls playing the game. You could go to like just about anywhere, and there was a table somewhere, and as long as you had beer, you could get a game going at just about any time, anywhere. But you go off campus, houses would just have dedicated areas to a game. Like, it was amazing to me. You could go somewhere and there'd be no one playing, because when I was a freshman, if there was a table up, there were people on it and they were playing, right? Like, that's all there was to it. So it really just become everywhere. And point to that is, like, people have gotten really, really good at it. Like, there was a general capability of playing the game. People knew the rules. I don't recall people. I mean, it would be like freshmen showing up at that point. It would be like, what's this, right? Like, everybody else had, by your sophomore year, you had seen the game 100 times.
Yeah, I mean, I think like there was a shift, a big shift, I think, in the Greek system, like probably after my freshman year, like where it was like pledging was a big deal, like where it was like, okay, everybody's gonna go, like, and that was the only way to get into the beer die tournament. But by the time after my sophomore year, it was like all those guys, everybody just hung out together, like more so than in years past. It was like it didn't matter. Like, hey, the only thing you did differently was like, hey, look, you've got, you're going to go to your formal, and that was it. But then it was like for the beer night tournaments, it was like, okay, who wants to play? Go play. Like, and it, like, just play wherever you can. And then they had a tournament at, so his kid was a year younger than me. He rented a mansion in Lake Forest. It was supposed to be torn down like less than a mile from campus. Like, it started out like you could go there, play 16-inch softball in one of the living rooms. Like, stupid nonsense. Like, and ultimately, like, they would have, I think they had like 7 or 8 tables at one point, like in the spring semester. And it didn't matter, like, whoever you're going to play with whoever, however, like, just everybody's going to play.
It was summer break. It was like summertime, and I was one of the people who was watching the dorms over the summer, so I got like the cool like apartment there and stuff.
Yeah,
right. And so and at the time there was a girls soccer camp, like I think it was like junior high girls soccer camp that was staying in the dorms, right? And a few of these other guys came, and we were playing beer die in the lobby, and we were having a great time. But and right out in the lobby, there's like camp girls and like moms all over the place, and we're just playing die right in the lobby, right? And we're just having a great time. But so I get called away to do like something on one of my jobs, and these other guys stayed there, and they left the lobby to go get like something and came back and realized, oh no, they dared each other to streak through the quad with all the girls, soccer girls around and stuff. And so they took their clothes off while I wasn't there and ran through it and like streaked through. But what they didn't realize was that they had locked the lobby door. They couldn't get back in. And so they had to climb up the wall to get back into the like second floor of the dorm to get back in so that they could come back through the door. And I mean, we all got in like huge trouble for it and stuff like that. But it was like that was one of the best, like one of my fondest beer die memories was the insanity that was kicked off after that beer die game happened. So
Yeah, that's gonna make the Lake Forest episode for fucking sure. Like, even if I have to go over 30 minutes, that's making the episode.
I mean, it was like, and it was
Before I got to Lake Forest, the school was known as a party-heavy dumping ground for East Coast rich kids who couldn't get into an Ivy or a NESCAC. The stories of 1980s debauchery were the stuff of legend when I arrived on campus in the mid-90s. At that time, Beard Eye was mostly contained with one particular fraternity, whose reputation was they do their own thing, but they do it well. When I pledged that fraternity and interviewed its members as part of my probationary period requirements, the seniors, to a person, answered no core requirements as the reason they chose Lake Forest. Since that lack of conditions didn't apply when we applied, the Pope and I wondered what it was like when the school was like that. And we caught up with a couple of true believers from the early days of Beard Eye at Lake Forest to paint the picture.
I was on campus 89. I was an 89 to 93 guy. And I remember going up to Harlan top floor. I was on the swim team. So there were a couple of swimmers in the fraternity, and this one guy, after about a week, he's like, you got to come by Harlan Hall, top floor, Alpha Chi. I went up there, and it was like paradise. Half the floor up there was were the rooms, everything from a couple quads to some doubles and singles. And then the other half of the top of the building was this lounge. And the first part was a penny bar. Do you remember the penny bar?
Oh, God, yeah.
Yeah. The penny bar where we kept all the kegs underneath it and stuff. And then there sat always a beer die table. It was like on two kegs. And then the back part was the lounge or the private lounge. I can't believe this actually happened. The school allowed us to put a lock on a door on the back half of the top floor. And that is where we had more VIP sofas, more booze in there, TV. Literally, it was like a lounge to relax in.
Speak easy.
So during the week, some guys would always be every once in a while maybe playing Beard Eye here and there, but the table just stayed there. But on the weekend, if we didn't host a party, there's always Beard Eye going on. Friday, Saturday, Sunday.
So I graduated high school in 86. So I started in 86. Yeah, so we had that top floor and we had the lounge there. And so the lounge was our literal playing ground. And we'd play foosball was the big game. And then of the college. And then I think it was generally in our fraternity, particularly where Beard Eye reigned supreme. And we played it religiously. And it was fascinating. And when it comes to, the whole history of it, I really can't ascertain any or glean any information on where it came from. I never even inquired. I just was so excited to play the game. Let me explain the game as I know it, because I don't know what you've already discussed, but maybe I can glean some information and maybe it'd be worthwhile. I don't know.
The idea of having guests on this podcast series explain their rules and how they play Beard Eye will hopefully be central to future episodes and future seasons as we reach out to make contact with the other uncontacted tribes, as the Pope likes to call them. Since the LFC rules of the mid-'80s were very similar to those we went over in episode 2, I'm going to bring you back now to this older brother of mine describing the differences between our rules and what I now know are the somewhat legendary old school rules we used to think about and talk about and hear about when we were in college.
God was a bad God. Sometimes the God was not. God was not a friendly God, and God was in a bad mood, and He just wanted to see you get really drunk. God could tell you to do it, and you could not You could not tell God to go fuck himself. Otherwise, you'd get very drunk. So then the game commenced, and there were a lot of rules. And the problem is when you're drinking beer and you have a ton of rules, it gets very difficult, and you have to keep your eye on all these rules. So, for example, as you throw the die, you couldn't throw the die too low. You had to have a certain trajectory to your die. If it went too low, it was called a whip. And so you had 3 whips, and then you had to stand and drink 1. And there's always 6 drinks to a full cup, because there were 6 points on a die. So the maximum drinking for a full cup is 6. So there was a whip score, and then there was an OB score. So if it went off the side of the table, that's called OB. And there were always 3 OBs. So you got 3 OBs, then you had to stand and drink. And then obviously if you hit the die off the side of the cup and it went off and you didn't catch it, that was called a body blow. And you would stand and drink for that. And if the die ultimately went in the cup, which was the coup de grace of a shot to sink the die in the cup, the opposing team would have to stand and drink the remainder of what was in the cup. And then the person that, wherever the die landed, they consumed the die in their mouth, and they'd have to spit the die on the table, and whatever the die rolled out to, they would have to pour a new beer in. So if it was a 6, not a good roll, you would have to fill your beer all the way up and then consume that whole beer before the game continued. So the alcohol consumption was at a fever pitch. Now, there's some other rules that are important to know. While you're playing beer die, music always had to be playing. Usually, 80s rock, whatever.
Yeah.
But if you were to throw a die in between the songs playing, so in between a song, if you threw the die, and if God was smart, he would say, you threw while music wasn't playing. That's a stand and drink. So you're basically drinking at all times. And the other thing that I do remember, but it's still kind of foggy, is that you could not leave the table until the game was over. No matter how drunk you got, you could not leave the table.
And then I remember sometimes whenever there were like 2 great teams that would face off against one another, man, there were some great volleys back and forth.
Oh, full
They
dives.
just kept going.
Full dives. I mean, there were heads
Fuck.
running, putting holes in walls to dive for the die.
The diving, certain
Oh, yeah.
people, Mr. D, oh my God, launching himself across the room, catching like Matrix.
Yeah.
And you're just watching it and he comes up with it.
Well, and
Have to drink. Everyone has to drink.
And part of the game was like the where the die was kind of bouncing and it took a perfect bounce and you could just like snap it out of the air, and it was kind of like that goalie that made that sweet glove save, and you kind of own that glove save. And that was a big part of it.
No one else played it. A couple times some fives would try to play. They sucked. You got to be playing this all the time. We let them play.
Oh, yeah.
They got destroyed. Everyone got destroyed. I did hear one time, or maybe another time, I don't know when in college up there, someone mentioned it came from the East Coast. I don't know who told me that. I don't know exactly where, but we didn't start it.
No,
No.
it was a mysteriously just appeared game, and no one really thought to ask.
While beer die did not catch on, when the older guys taught their contemporaries, the generation they trained was legendary at our school, enough so to light a spark in other groups who came across it. including this story from the greatest Beard Eye player I ever played against.
Yeah, I mean, like you guys obviously were playing long before us, so and I always like I can remember the first time I ever played Beard Eye, which is crazy because I had no idea what it was. But I was on campus and like a handball player who was like 2 years older than me. He's like, "Hey, it was a Saturday night. He's like, come over. I think it was Nala, and he's like, come play this game with me." And I walked into I don't know whose room it was, but Big John was playing, and I don't know who Big John's partner was, but I think he always played with the same guy. But there was I'm sure you remember the Touch of God table
Yeah,
or
of
the Hand
course.
of God.
Of course. Yeah.
Like that was the first time I ever saw Beard Eye and played Beard Eye was on that table versus Big John, and they obviously played a different game. They weren't super mobile, but they kind of put their shoulders together, and no
Yeah.
guy was getting past them, and it just kind of rolled down into their hands.
It was like Plinko on The Price is Right.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. And like I think we got rolled like 7-2.
Yeah.
And that may even be generous to our side, but I'm like, how can anyone ever beat these guys? But at that point, that's what gave me the itch to figure this game out. And
the person mentioned by name in this story was clearly a legendary figure during our era at the school, and a guy who kind of showed me and my cohort the ropes, both at the school and eventually down in Chicago after we graduated. He also imparted to us the notion that nothing we would ever do could be as cool as anything the older guys had done. That is, of course, until one day when our cohort added its own chapter to the Beard Eye legend.
Yeah, I mean that was those guys. Well, we played Die on the Beach too, and we played Die, in the when it used to be the chapter room. We used to play there. I said, "You guys ever play on the roof?" I think this was a couple of years after we graduated, and they're like, "What?" I'm like, "Oh yeah, we dragged a board up on the roof and played on the roof and brought a keg and had a party." Like, all right, that's pretty cool.
It's spring 97, sorry. It was one of those first beautiful spring days when it is just, hey, we're going to drink outside type of thing was going on.
Yeah, when I think back, I think we were playing hallway Die on the third floor up there, and it was early afternoon, and it was a shitty day out, and we just started drinking and playing hallway Die. I know it was me and Dell.
And I remember getting back to the dorm. It was still daylight from whatever I've been doing, and I kind of started going around looking for people. Let's get a game going. Let's see what's happening. Where are people at? And it was like everybody was gone. I don't know if the athletes were all out of town or just what was happening that day, but it seemed like I couldn't find anybody. And I worked my way. I mean, geography of Gregory. For those that don't know, you've got two sort of low-rise towers with an adjoining, like one-story common area that connects its two buildings. In the basement, you would have these lounge sort of large rooms that were assigned to fraternities or sororities. And then sort of a stairway up. And on the outside of that stairway, you would have a singles wing, which would basically be a hallway, 4 doors into singles units and a shared bathroom down there. And so there were 6 of those type of setups on the outside of the, 2 towers. And then within the towers, you had a bunch of quads, essentially 12 quads that made up those entire structures. So,
we're just bored, and the janitor's closet has access to the roof up there. So I don't remember how it happened, but someone ended up getting in there, and there was no lock on the hatch to the roof. So initially, it's just a bunch of jerks playing Beard Eye in the hallway, and people would go up on the roof, just to look around or whatever. And then we started to look at the hatch, and we're like, I bet we could fit this table through that hatch.
Top floor, I walk into the singles wing, and I see one of our friends who is like halfway in and halfway out of the maintenance closet, which I know because I had no idea there was a maintenance closet in there. And he like looks at me, he's like, they left the maintenance closet unlocked. And I remember being like, so what are we gonna do, wash it? Like, what? Why are you standing there? It's so weird. And I walk down the hall and I look in, and at that point, someone is, popping the hatch up to the roof, right? And it was like a look down, like, roof's open, boys, get moving, right? And
so that was sort of the genesis of it. So we, after we had enough beers, early afternoon, we're probably talking, 3-4 o'clock now. And, we picked up, we had a couple guys go all the way up through, and a couple guys sort of, jimmy it through, and it fit perfectly, right? It was 4 feet wide on the diagonal for the hatch. So we got it up there, and everyone got real excited. Then we, brought up the garbage cans and in the beer, and we thought it was just gonna be like a 1-game kind of thing. And then we played a game, and then we said, oh no, we're doing this.
So it starts out pretty small, and it's still daylight, and it's just a couple guys playing on the rooftop. But again, it wasn't really busy and active, right? And so every now and then we'd see somebody, and like there's this interesting phenomenon that in my personal life I've come to better, or professional life I've come to better understand. But people don't look up. 30 degrees above the horizon, like people's attention has to be drawn to move that far. And like, so there's a whole existence that exists 30 feet above our heads that nobody ever notices whatsoever. And so it really played out that day because we could just be standing up there, be quiet, and like, we would have security walking around and like no one had any idea we were up there. And really that worked for quite a while until like people on the fraternity and the quads across the hall could start to see us, right? And
you had the Brotherhood guys looking over from McClure. They were watching us kind of during the day, just out on their little balconies, over there, and just kind of like looking at us like, what are those monkeys doing up there?
But slowly but surely, it was kind of like the chirps would come in from the roof, like, hey, Dave, get some beer, get up here, right? Kind of do that, like, guys on the roof, like, yeah, get beer. And so it slowly but surely, and then it just got darker. And then like now you had like, I don't know, 60 to 80 people up on the rooftop at that point, just going at it. The crazy part that I would love to check somebody else's memory from that night, because once it got dark, we weren't really playing beer night. We were just all partying up there. And like now it was too loud to control. But a keg showed up at some point, which was a rare event on campus to have a keg show up, let alone all the way up on the rooftop. That would have had to have been pushed through the hatch and everything to get up there. But I think one of the other fraternities, that was like their buy-in to come over to the party, basically, like bring it.
And then it started to get dark. But after, it started a little too dark to play. So we decided, well, we had a keg left over from something or other. I can't remember what it was. It was at one of the off-campus houses, and there was a lot left. So we went, I think we decided to bring that up on the roof and have just a straight up party. So, we were calling, like I was dating a girl at the time and she came over, and everyone's like, all of our friends came over, and there were probably 20, 25 people up on the roof, so then eventually, we had the party. And the most shocking thing ever was the security never came. I mean, it was utterly shocking. We never thought in a million years we wouldn't get caught doing this, but we hung out there until, the party was over. So no, it was a great time.
I just remember that being a particularly fun, crazy party, and like definitely demonstrate the cat and mouse we were playing security, because someone would spot security coming up like a walkway or something like that, music would get cut, everyone would just kind of watch this guy walking around, like, and really he was like, where the fuck is everybody?
We'd comported ourselves admirably in carrying on the tradition that started in the 4th floor of a middle campus lounge during the Reagan administration. But the innovation was just getting started. And sometimes Beardi, like most things in life, benefit from a woman's touch. That's where we'll pick up next on the road to Beardi Nation. Where the challengers strut their stuff. Red Solo cups and dice that fly. The Road to Beardi Nation is produced by the 9 Stories Up Investigative Department in association with Beanbag Studios. If you think you know a true believer, please let them know about the show. If you think you may be a true believer, please give us a Biz Star rating. If you think you may be part of the choir, please reach out to us via email at beardinationpodcast@gmail.com or Beard Eye Nation on the major social media outlets so we can tell your story in a future episode. The first Beard Eye Nation live reunion is taking place this July in the Chicago area. Please email us for more details or check out our website, beardeyenation.com. As always, I'd like to thank the Choir of True Believers, to which we not only added a member trained outside the walls of our fraternity in this episode, but also 2 original disciples at Lake Forest, who demonstrate that maybe history does actually repeat itself.
No matter how drunk you got, you could not leave the table, which turned into the invention of a 5-gallon bucket. And I do remember one player, if we're not naming names, I'll call him M. But he was famous for playing beard dye all day long, and he would puke in the bucket.
Yeah.
So I don't know if that's gentlemanly, but it was needless to say, it was a full-on competition.